My name is Tia Toko with Rediscovery Coaching, and I look forward to sharing my story with you on Conversations with Pearl.
Hello, sunshine, good to see you again. Had to walk out to let you back in. Stuck in a storm of a relationship. Lost my fire. Oh, and I forgot about me for way too long. But it's rolled on. Now there ain't no shade around here. Once you leave the clouds, you're under. Ain't it funny how there ain't no rain or clear? Why'd it take so long to leave you in the rearview mirror? Now nobody gonna steal my sunshine or turn my blue sky gray. All I know is at the end of the day, wildflowers grow when there ain't no shade.
Hi, everybody. This is Pearl, and you are on for another episode of Conversations with Pearl. And I'm so excited because I have a really special guest. And you guys, if you've heard me before, I talk about how I've made so many different connections on Facebook, social media, Instagram, LinkedIn, and how I've been empowered by some of the great women that I've met. And today we have another one of those amazing women that I want to bring to you. And today on our Conversations with Pearl, we have the honor of having Tia Toko join us. And Tia is the founder of Rediscovery Coaching and a recovery coach. She has devoted her coaching practice to helping women conquer alcohol addiction by learning how to take charge of their sobriety. So with over 10 years in recovery community, including struggling with alcohol addiction herself, she finally figured out a way to truly break free from alcohol. Now she helps hundreds of women take charge of their sobriety so they can have that same freedom and stop fearing relapse. So Tia, welcome to Conversations with Pearl.
Hi, thanks for having me. Really excited to be here today.
We're so excited to have you. Tell everybody where you're at, because I think, we're still in, some of us, I'm in Florida, and they call us, the stepchild of the US because we don't have masks and all that stuff through COVID. But tell everybody where you're at and what's happening in your world with COVID today.
Yeah, I'm up in the great north in Canada, coming from Toronto, but we are in lockdown still. We've been, I feel like, in lockdown for a year, but that's just how Canada's operating, unfortunately. But yeah, I'm a Canadian, so if you hear some A's in here, don't mind my slang. I'll do my best to keep my Canadian side at bay.
You're all good here. I'm so excited. So are you able, I know you're in complete lockdown, so I know you're going to share part of your story, and part of your story is being very athletic and getting outside and running. Are you able to go out and do some running and do some exercising?
Yeah, we're allowed to go outside for exercise and necessities and whatnot. It's more social gatherings we're not allowed to do. So I've been adapting to that, and self-care we talk about a lot, and making sure to stay connected, which is a huge part of recovery. I'll get into later, but it's challenging, but going with it.
Awesome. I know here, we've got Memorial Day weekend here, so we're all heading out to the beach, and well, I'm not, because this is the weekend that's crowded. This is actually really our first weekend that we have. All of our theme parks are no mask, like Disney, everybody's no mask. So
oh wow,
yeah, it's going to be pretty crowded. Traffic's going to be pretty intense. So we're staying homebound this weekend. So, but I'm
to the beach every other weekend, right?
I try. I love to go to the beach for sunset. My kids, when they were younger, my kids are flown and grown, 24 and 21. But when we used to go to the beach, I leave my house at 1. So everybody would be coming home as we were arriving, because I like to stay and see the sunset. So, they're like, do we have to stay so long? Like, yeah, we do. So
at least you're not making them get up for the sunrise, right?
No. I'm not a sunrise girl.
Okay.
They don't have to worry about that. So, well, I'm excited. I really want us to just get right into it. Like, I know, you have a world of coaching. That's how we met. We've done, we collaborate a few things together as well. But let's share everybody your story. Like, tell us the life of Tia. What brought you to becoming the recovery coach that you are today, and where are you at today?
Yeah. So I'm a recovery coach, and I specialize in women's empowerment, sober coaching. And I do that because that's my story. I struggled with alcohol addiction for the majority of my adult life. And, along the way, I realized that there's not many recovery systems designed around women's needs. So that's what I do now. And I'm really excited to be here to talk about that. I'm so passionate about opening eyes and ears around the needs for women in the recovery community. But before I get into that, I guess I'm going to tell a bit of my story, if that's okay with you, Pearl. Start from the beginning so you guys get to know me and understand, what led me to addiction, how I got out of it, and whatnot. So
yeah, absolutely. Let's
okay.
get right into it. And so I just want to also share, anybody that's listening to this, we'll make sure they'll put some links in there to if anybody is touched by Tia's story, if it triggers you, just we've got some links. We'll make sure that you get some contact information for Tia as well. So go for it, Tia. Let's hear your story, and
yeah,
I can't wait for everybody to be empowered.
I'm gonna go back to the beginning a little bit, so bear with me. I won't take too much time, but my life really started right from the beginning. I operated a little differently with alcohol, and going back to even further than that, my mom had me at a young age and buried my dad kind of because she got pregnant, and it was kind of your typical get pregnant, this is going to be a struggle situation, but my mom was like a Cinderella story and really worked her way out of it and did incredible things with her life. And I was along for that journey with her. So our life, my dad left about when I was 3 years old. And he wasn't not in my life. He just wasn't active in my life. He was always there if I needed him or if I called him, but he wasn't really aggressively parenting me. And so it was kind of like me and my mom at first. And she met my stepdad when I was around 4, and he became kind of my father figure. But to understand a little better, my dad is African, my mom's white, and so I'm biracial. And race comes into my story a little later, but I just want to share that. And so when she met my stepdad, he was also, so she's young, they're young, and he's also white. So now I'm kind of this biracial girl with 2 parents. And, as I was growing up, it always looked a little off to me. Like it looked different than you'd see in movies and whatnot, but it was okay because we were all a little broken together and we're all figuring it out together. And that was just kind of how I saw it. And then eventually, my mom, she's working 2 jobs and really building a life, and my stepdad too. And I would spend a lot of time with my grandparents. They were like my steady force, Pearl. How, it's not always my parents that were my steady force. My grandparents were. I'd always go there. I felt like they were my home, my anchor. But my mom was working away and building a life for us. And when I was about 13, they had my sister, my mom and stepdad. And for me, I was so excited to finally have a sibling, although at 13 years old, I was a nightmare of a girl. So it's not as exciting as when I was younger, but it's really excited to have my sister. But it was almost like once she was born overnight, it was like I woke up and this family I had seen on TV and envisioned and, that's been presented as a nuclear family was happening. And it was happening in my life, but I was outside of it. And it was kind of like they looked like this perfect little unit. They all looked alike. They all had the same name. And I just felt that I didn't belong. And I felt like a burden. And I really struggled with worrying they're going to figure out I shouldn't be there. And these are kind of beliefs I had in myself. And I developed in myself at 13 years old. And so that just gives you a bit of background of what was happening around me. And it was a lot of anxiety. I had a lot of needs to be perfect because I was afraid of being found out. Like I had to be perfect in school. I had to play on every sports team and, do student council, whatever it was. And like my coaches would even always tell my mom, like, Tia can't handle criticism. Like you criticize her, it like destroys her world. Because I always felt like they're going to figure out I don't belong here. And, my school was also very white. So I was just feeling out of place all of the time. And my first encounter with alcohol, all my friends around me, it was a different sensation for them, whereas they were trying to have fun and use it to like elevate their mood. For me, it felt like it was the first time I could breathe. Felt like all those feelings of being a burden and not looking like my family and not fitting in, it all kind of dissipated. And that was like, I can remember my first time having alcohol. I knew I drank it differently, and I responded to it differently. But, it wasn't of concern. I mean, I didn't know this at the time. I know this looking back, right? But anyways, fast forwarding through high school a little bit, I never really drank excessively. I didn't drink during the week. I wouldn't say I was, alcoholically behaving. But when I drank, it was different. And I responded different and I used it differently. I was always trying to escape how I felt. So when I was graduating university, I was getting ready to go away to or when I was graduating high school, I was getting ready to go away to university. And my grandpa got sick and died really suddenly. And then a few months later, my grandma died really suddenly. So I don't know if you remember, I just, shared they were kind of my anchors. And while my whole life was always on the move and we are always moving from an apartment to a bigger house, and I was always feeling not good enough, they were where I went to feel safe. And all of a sudden in my life, they were just gone. And I think when that happened, I just absolutely shut down. And I was going away to school where it was socially acceptable to drink all of the time. And I didn't have coping mechanisms to deal with this. It was almost like a perfect storm. I had all this pain and grief. I operated differently with alcohol. And I was going to a place where I could drink all of the time and it not be considered a flag. And I don't know what it's like for you guys in the States, Pearl, but in Canada, like at least in the universities I went to, and I can guess by some of the shows I've seen, you can drink every day of the week and it's not weird, in university. I don't know. Do you have?
Yeah, I mean, I hear, I mean, it's pretty much, you're 21, but when they go to universities and they're there, there's no overseeing. So yeah, they can pretty much drink. I remember he played with the Boston Celtics, and I can't think of his name, but he came and spoke at the high school for the kids. And he talked about how through, high school, it was fine. But when he got to college, it was so much, like you said, all around him every day, all the time. That's what led him down his path of, his addiction and how, and he shared his story, how it changed. But yeah, so I'm listening to you and I'm thinking, there's that study that says like between like that 3 to 7 years old is what we hear and what we think is what kind of brings us and, can affect us as we get older. And so like what you were sharing about, feeling like fitting in because your mom and stepdad are white and here you are mixed race and you're trying to fit in and, and then I can't imagine like having your grandparents being that, that kind of rock, like you said, like I can go, I know I'm me, I don't have to worry about fitting in. And then to have all that change so drastically and then have, that sibling, which, you loved having a sister, but so many life changes that happen. I just can't, I can't imagine what that felt like. And like you said, to have that comfort, like we all find something, sometimes it's food, sometimes it's, alcohol, it could be drugs, whatever that is, to make us feel like, oh, we're okay, and so yeah. I can't imagine all that went through. So so you're now at university, and so what happens next?
Yeah. And I just want to bring up while you were talking, it reminded me too, like it's a lot about our development and our own beliefs. And now that I'm a coach, I'm a huge promoter of understanding the underlying beliefs we have about ourselves to promote change, because there was no lack of love from my mom or stepdad, and like as I'm older now, and if anything I look back and I think they overcompensated trying to make sure I fit in. And my in my mind, my sister being born, I was like, my stepdad has his real kid now, but he never did anything to actually warrant those beliefs, right? It was what I believed. So then I used those things to justify in my world. And no matter what they did, there was never going to change that belief without actually addressing the belief. So my point with all of that is like when I'm working with women now, I'm working in this area, we have to go to underlying beliefs. But I just wanted to share that too. I think a lot of parents, that struggle with their children or anybody who struggles knowing somebody that suffers from addiction, you can want to help them and do a lot of things, but it starts from changing within.
Yeah, and I hear what you're saying, because like you and I have shared deeply about my oldest son and his path, and he was born of my heart. So through adoption, I always wanted to make sure, like you said, your stepdad, there was nothing that was changing. He still loved you the same, but it was your thoughts. And when I go back and we've talked with Matthew about on his journey, like he said, it was nothing you did, but those were my thoughts. That was my belief that I had, that, I wasn't wanted, even though I was wanted by you guys. I wasn't wanted by my biological mom, so it's so true what you said, like that, those underlying beliefs, once we get and we start working with them and we start peeling that onion and going, what's really there, that can make a huge difference in how we move forward in our life.
Yeah. And even before going to the university stuff, like I'm just thinking, I remember my stepdad, once I asked him if I could call him dad, and he would have loved it, but my dad was still in my life. Like, I'd still see him whenever we had scheduled time or whatever. So he said, like, I'm not really comfortable because I feel like that's taken away from your dad. And because I was justifying my belief that I wasn't his kid, I took that as like he was embarrassed or he didn't want me to call him dad. And, we've talked about it since. And he's like, I was just trying to not upset your dad, and nobody's given cards of how to deal with this stuff, but it's just I wasn't looking at it objectively, and neither was he, but like I believe something and then I used other things to justify it. So
It's
yeah,
so
a
funny
lot
you
of the
said
time.
what you said about we don't have the cards, right?
Yeah.
So when you're pregnant, you get this book, What to Expect When You're Pregnant, right?
Yeah.
It's called, but it doesn't, we know as parents, and I know you haven't walked that journey yet, but you've shared like where your dad, your stepdad or dad was coming from, what his thoughts were that, he didn't want to take away from your dad. So, there's no book, and all we can do
Right.
is the best we can do. That's what I tell, all my friends are going to have, I'm like, just do the best you can do. And if I could say, if there's anything I could say, there's one thing I always share with everybody is that when you do start having children, like create that moment, even when they're just little, like will you just go out one day a week with them somewhere and make it the same day every week, same time, and make it a conversation that this is our table. Like you're coming to a table with them to have any kind of conversation they want to. It's a safe space. They can tell you anything with no repercussions, that you're just there to help and listen and walk them through. I mean, that's a big piece of advice I share. So I'm glad to hear like your stepdad, that was so honorable. Like he wanted to honor your dad, but I can see what you're saying in your head at 13, it was like validation of what you're feeling.
Right. Yeah. So 100%. I love that idea of the gathering. And that's how I felt with my grandparents too. Like every time I went there, it was my safe space. So that's that fell out from under me. And then I mentioned, it was like a perfect storm because I was already on the verge of drinking erratically and alcoholically. And then I have this trauma that I don't know how to handle. I don't know how to cope with. They were only in their 60s. So my mom didn't know how to cope with it either. Like it was so out of the blue. And I just got to go away and disappear. So in university, my drinking really escalated, but it was never an issue, I would say. Like in first year, for instance, like you drink on weekends, you drink all the time. I was drinking to escape, and I would always drink more than everyone else. But it wasn't like noticeably a problem. And what I figured out in university, and this is a huge problem in society, I believe now, is if I checked all the boxes and did everything that I'm supposed to, nobody really cares what's going on behind the scenes. And I realized this unintentionally, just like, I don't know, I figured it out and I used that methodology to fuel my addiction. So similar to how I was in high school, but I got super involved in university. I was a teaching assistant. I joined a bunch of clubs, and it was almost like, it's not because there was anything special to me, but I needed to perform very efficiently when I was sober so that I can drink how I wanted and not raise flags. And I remember, I was a teaching assistant, and like I was doing things that were kind of off par, but nobody suspected anything because they're like, well, she's a teacher assistant. Like she's late, she might look a little off, she might be hungover, but I doubt she is because, she's responsible for other kids. So things like that in society, I think people turn a blind eye to what's going on if you look good on paper. But that being said, my drinking really escalated. I mean, I went from drinking Friday to Sunday, to Friday to Monday, to Friday to Tuesday, and by fourth year, I was maybe sober once a week, if that. And so by fourth year, I got hired at a good job because I had checked all the boxes, and I had a good corporate job coming up, but I was like not in a place to be entering the world. I was just very struggling, and I was leaving this safety bubble. Did you want to jump in, Pearl? I thought you were about to say something.
No, I was just going to say what you're saying about the university. Like that's so true. And if you think about it, even on the other side, like athletes, if they're that star athlete and they're doing all that stuff they're supposed to do in the field, what's happening off the side, even with grades, doesn't really. It's sort of like closes a blind eye to it all. So yeah. So you've gone through university and now you're trying to come out to the real world.
Yeah. So before I started my job, I was starting my job in Toronto. I went home for the summer in Ottawa. And I stayed at home before moving out there. And I didn't change my drinking habits. So my parents realized what was going on, and they obviously suspected it, but not to that level. Like I would be drunk in the middle of the day at 2 p.m. And so they were concerned. And then they were kind of in this position like, what are we supposed to do? I was only home for the summer. I didn't need them. I had a job waiting for me. I had a car. I was moving. And it was just kind of like, that last hurrah where I saw them before I just went over the rails. And I remember my mom pleaded with me. She's like, please just go to an AA meeting. And I went to my first AA meeting. My stepdad actually took me. And I was so like arrogant. I was like, I'm not like these people. I'm like a 22-year-old girl. I'm just drinking because it's normal. I don't belong here. I'm about to go start my good job, better than this, blah, 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 right? But somebody said something in that meeting that I actually remember. And he looked at me and I showed up. I'm pretty sure I was hungover, and I've been in the A community before now. So now I know what it's like on the other side. But like I was showing up like drunk, somebody's taking me, like they geared the meeting a little around me. Um, and one guy looked at me and he said, you know, and he was in this John Deere hat. He was a trucker. I couldn't relate to him at all. I was like, I don't relate to you. But he looked at me and he said, I only don't get drunk for the 2 hours it takes me to get here and stay here and then get home. But at least for those 2 hours, I am not drinking. So I remember this, I put it somewhere in my brain and I left it. It comes back 7 years later. But so I moved to Toronto, I started my job. Um, and, you know, I would just say this is kind of like a shit show of escalation of drinking at this point. I had a boyfriend, a serious boyfriend. I eventually moved in with him. That probably got destroyed because of my drinking. My job, you know, I was performing at first, but I'm calling in sick. And then so I'd move positions, and I'd always be making decisions to support my drinking. And like I started at my career in a really good position to be very successful. And I was in a leadership program, and you know, I think a lot of things that are ignored in recovery community is the opportunity cost of drinking too. So at the end of, for instance, like this saga, I would say of 4 years of just getting smashed and my drinking terrorizing my life, um, I still had a job. You know, I still paid my bills. I still had an apartment. I was miserable. I was drowning and I was dying. But like again, everything looked fine on the surface, and it didn't flag to me that it was like as big of a problem it was for a long time, because I still had a job and because I had these things. And you know, the women I'm working with now, I always talk to them about the opportunity cost of your drinking, because I would have been a lot higher, a lot further along in my career if I didn't put these limitations on myself, you know? So I just wanted to share that. But anyway, so for this 4 years, you know, 22 to 26, I would say, like I lost friendships, I lost relationships, and I just I just got caught into addiction. Everything revolved around alcohol for me. You know, there's a million stories I can share. I'm not going to go into it, but like by the end, I was making choices of how to like best not die and also still get drunk. Like things like, I don't know if you're familiar with Canada, but our liquor board, our liquor is controlled. So we buy all our liquor from the LCBO, it's called in Ontario. And on long weekends, they're closed. And so by 26, my drinking was so bad that like I couldn't buy alcohol to sustain me through a long weekend because I would just drink it all right away. But I also couldn't not have it for the day it was closed. Does that make sense? So you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, it totally makes sense. It's
Okay.
interesting how you said that too, because I remember, you know, with my son, that's exactly what he did. Like he could have it, but it wasn't like it could last. Like it was like there.
Yeah.
Like yeah.
Like
So
and at that age, so I would buy it and I wouldn't leave my house till it was finished. So it was very concerning, like if I'm buying 40 ounces or 60 ounces, that I'm going to drink all of that in one sitting. So I had to do things like take some of it and put it in my car trunk, because I know I would have to be sober enough to walk downstairs the parking garage to get it out of the trunk. So that just gives you an idea of like the kind of decisions I'm making. I'm so scared that I'm going to drink it all at one sitting that I'm actually hiding it in the parking lot. And like, it's crazy to me now that that's just, I was so deep into it
it's
that I
like
wasn't.
you were so into it, like you were planning how to be able to still be drinking when places were closed. Like you were, you know,
Yeah.
I remember it kind of reminds me when I first did my weight loss journey, and I didn't tell my husband I was doing this journey because of the expense. And I would have my food, I'd have certain of it in the house, and I would put it in my dresser, and I would like, but I was strategically, you know, planning. So you were strategically planning for your drinking, is what it sounds like, right?
Yeah, and I'm planning not to die. How can I do it without dying? Like the
Right.
decisions I'm making, and I know it could kill me the level I'm drinking at, but I'm still more concerned with how to do it. Um,
Wow.
so yeah, so that's the point I was at, and I guess one of my biggest breaking points is my sister, who 13 years apart, I love so much and like looks up to me, and like I I love her probably more than anybody else. And my family came down to visit me for a soccer game. She had a soccer tournament there, and they were going to pick me up and I was going to go. And I got drunk the night before, and I think I woke up around 2 a.m. and I was like, I can do another one before they get here. And I ended up waking up from a blackout, and they were downstairs, and I was like half an hour late, and I just got in the shower and I'm like, okay, I'm fine. And I start walking in the car, and my mom gets out of the car and comes over to me, and I live right outside of the CN Tower. I'm sure you know what the CN Tower is. So imagine how busy this place is. It's like the main attraction in Canada. I live around there. And I'm like, and she comes out of the car. There's people everywhere. And she's like, you are not coming. I don't want my Amy to see you like this. You're slurring, you're stumbling. Like she could tell I was smashed from across the street. And you would think my response, like, I love my sister, I love my family, I haven't seen them in months. My response would be like, oh man, I screwed up. That you'd think that would be my response. But all I did was I sat on the curb, and I remember thinking, thank God I can go back upstairs and drink. I don't have to waste these 4 hours of my life sitting
Wow.
at a soccer game.
That was like, that's,
Yeah.
you can't, I'm sure we can't even imagine like how that would feel.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like you
It's
said,
like,
just,
you want something. Like I love them, and that would be my strongest love force. But still, all I could think about was like, I just freed up 4 hours to go get drunk again.
and
You know?
but I mean, also, isn't it like that's part of the disease, right?
Yeah.
It's that part of that disease that the people you love so much, it's unfortunate those are the people that get hurt so much because of what the hold is that the disease, the addiction has over you.
Yeah, and what I know now, I mean, I know all the science behind it and biology. I've studied this now, but like alcohol literally rewires your brain. It rewires it to choose it over other things. And that's a perfect example of there's no reason why I would be excited that my family's leaving or that somebody I love is, I'm not going to see them. But it had a clause so deep in me, and my brain was rewired that it was kind of like, okay, good, we can go back upstairs and choose it over other things. But yeah, it's the addiction. It's not a choice. And I think that's a lot of debate in, the world in general. Is addiction a choice? And there's biological reasons it's not, there's physiological reasons, emotional reasons, mental reasons. It's not a choice. What I say is a choice is once you get sober, you have the choice to put in work to keep your sobriety. But when you're in addiction, it's not necessarily you choosing. I wasn't choosing alcohol over my sister or my family that day. I didn't have a choice. It was just, I couldn't help myself,
Would you say it's sort of like too when you were saying about having people say you have a choice, right? I think about women who are in abusive situations, right? People will say to them, "You have a choice," and you could say they have a choice. However, when they get in that situation, and like I was talking, I'm coaching, somebody about a year ago, and she was talking about how she's come through it now, but the feeling of I just want a love from, because she didn't have a father figure. So she looked at it as a love from a father figure. Like she wanted that love. And so she was getting that love, even though there was consequences for the actions that he was doing, and it wasn't that, yeah, people can easily say you have a choice. However, when that's the environment you're in, and you don't know, and you're pulled to that talk in our head of, this is more important than this. Like you said, the brain switching it. It's the brain's a powerful thing, right?
It is. Yeah, it is. And like on conscious levels, biologically, subconscious levels, these things aren't necessarily a choice. And like you're talking about, sometimes it's fear response, right? We shut down, whatever it is. But when it comes to addiction, it's, people in it, it's not like we're choosing to do these things. It's gotten our claws in us if you're susceptible to addiction. But yeah, so I was sitting on the curb, and everybody was walking around me, and felt like I was underwater in slow motion. And like that's when I kind of realized, like, wow, this is really bad, because I'm excited to go upstairs. I'm excited that I don't get to see them, or I don't have to see them, And I was sad at the same time, like I really wanted to see them, but my excitement to go back up and drink was really overpowering me. So what happened after that was my sister, who was probably around 13 at the time, they left, they went back to Ottawa, and she called me every single day begging me to get help. She called me every day for 2 weeks, and I like remember pieces of this, and sometimes my memories are foggy. You know how older people say that, like it's like that in addiction, you don't remember everything. But I remember sporadic conversations, and I remember saying like, Amy, I'm way too far gone. Like this is beyond help. There's no coming back from this. And so if you're watching this and you are struggling and you think you're way too far gone, you are never too far gone. That's not a thing. You could be on a street corner homeless and you're not too far gone. So I just wanted to share that. But eventually after 2 weeks, she's so persistent. I got sick of telling her no. And I was like, okay, fine, gonna go to an AA meeting. And I started my recovery in AA, and I have a lot of great things to say about AA. And I'm going to get into this a little more later. So for now, I got sober in AA. I realized I was powerless over alcohol at this point in my life, and I surrendered to that process, and I got a sponsor, and I did some of the work, or I did all of the work that was asked of me. And I stayed sober for a good enough time to get cocky enough to think I'm not an alcoholic anymore. I was like, okay, I can quit alcohol. I actually don't need help. And so I went on a trip, and then I started drinking, and I relapsed. And a relapse is, I think, one of the most dangerous places to be, and then in my experience, because that program told me if you can't do this, you're never going to get help. And I believed that. And I believed that if I couldn't work the AA system, then I wasn't going to ever get sober. And so now I'm feeling like a failure. And now I'm feeling like I have no options. And I drank for about 6 more months in that kind of painful state. And that's probably the closest I would say I came to death, because I was drinking. I knew I had a problem, but now I was so hopeless to any solution with it. So I remember I was lying in bed, and do you remember the John Deere hat story I told you? So I was lying in bed. I was like contemplating suicide and drinking all of the time. And I was lying in bed, and I was like, I should go call one of the people I met when I was in AA and go to a meeting. And then I was like, there's no way I want to go to that. I'm not ready to stop drinking. And I remembered what he said. He's like, just for the 2 hours that I go to the meeting and I stay, that's all I commit to for not drinking. And I'm like, okay, I can do that. I can go to a meeting for 2 hours, not drink, and then I can come home and drink again. And it was just crazy how like I never remembered this guy for the last 7, 8 years, and all of a sudden in that moment it popped in my head. And that was huge for me, and I think a lot of the things, a lot of people feel like relapse is a failure, or if you don't stay sober, something is a failure. And recovery is not linear, and we take things we learn throughout it until we get it right. And that was a perfect example, because that was my first meeting. I took nothing away from that. Like I said, I was cocky, arrogant, and being a little shit, to be honest. But I still picked up an important piece of information that I would say saved me later on. Even though I went almost like from that meeting down, I still got information that ended up getting me sober permanently. So it's really important, if you're in addiction, or if you're struggling, or if you're in a relapse, to understand like it's not only up all of the time. It's okay to have ebbs and flows. It's okay for it to drop down and come back up, because every step of the way, every time we make the decision to get help, learn something new, work on our recovery, that is building us stronger for a future date we're not aware of.
I can imagine, like, for just somebody who is not, like I don't have an addiction. So, and we have those valleys, right? In life, we have those valleys, but to add on top of that an addiction, I can imagine how, somebody might be feeling like, I'm in a relapse. I don't think, it's like you said, it's never too late. It's never, it's not the end.
It never is. No, not at all. And like relapse is a learning process, and it's kind of tricky to think about. And I'm going to talk about a little bit more of my philosophies around that stuff. You want to almost think of a relapse as never going to happen, but know that if it does happen, you can handle it. You almost want to be afraid of a relapse so that you make decisions to support your sobriety, but not so far from the scale that you believe if it happens, you're never going to come back. It's almost like tricking your mind, I mean. But yeah, so I started getting help, and I did AA for a bit, and again, I met some great people. And I think like these are my total personal beliefs on this. For me, AA helped me get sober, but to stay sober, I needed to take different steps. And the experience I had with AA, the best part of it was it focuses on a spiritual recovery, spiritual program it's known for, and the connections and the people. You're not going to beat having a community of people who understand you in recovery other than like a program like that. It's phenomenal, and you need to have a community. I'm a huge promoter of having community in recovery. But what I was struggling with and why I went through some relapses even after getting sober, I didn't get it right until 2018, but I struggled staying sober because being powerless over alcohol, which is one of the things that you do in AA, for a woman is challenging. And I'm going to talk about the difference between men and women as well. But I was always feeling powerless over alcohol, and I was always feeling like I was at its mercy. And I needed that at the beginning to surrender to getting help. But to stay sober and live healthy in a healthy mind, I also needed to be empowered instead. And I can't be empowered and powerless at the same time. I can't be an alcoholic and also not care about drinking at the same time, not be affected by alcohol. And that's just something I learned that works for me along the way. That was where my struggle always was. I always felt like I was at alcohol's mercy. I was afraid of it, and I was relying on willpower. And my willpower, everybody's willpower eventually runs out, you know? So now, as a coach, a lot of the things I look at, in addition to spiritual transformation, which you can get from AA, I think it's really important to have an emotional, physical, and mental transformation as well. And I discovered that kind of just on accident, but there's actual science behind it. A lot of people do it. So I went home. Do you have any questions on that? Does that make sense so far? I
think it makes totally sense. Like you said, and I think too, like you were talking about, for women, whether you're in a relationship or not, you have a family or not, I think for women, we just feel like we're supposed to be so much more responsible for the world, right? Like we're supposed to be the one who empowers everybody, because I mean, me, I'm a self-care coach. So women think that, oh, I have to put everybody first and I have to come in last. So I can see we're feeling like, that alcohol has power over you, and, and allowing it to have the power because, well, I got to take care of that first. So yeah, I can imagine. So yeah, I would love for you to share like how, like,
how I broke free.
How you broke free, and how how you are coaching today, and how, like, what was it that, like you and I've talked before about how, AA, how it's, your thoughts on how it's, and you just shared where it's gotten you today, but then from there, what you felt like for the empowerment piece, like how did you start doing that for yourself?
Yeah. So to get sober, that's where AA came in for me. Where I was able to surrender, build a community, and focus on the spiritual shift. Now, to stay sober in a world like this, I needed to take another leap, which I talk about as empowerment. And I needed to not care about alcohol at all, not be affected by it, and not like, I don't hate it, I'm indifferent. The opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. When we hate something, when it has power over us, we're still at its mercy. Right. So that's where my philosophies came in. And I started this, or I found it, I figured it out for myself when I went home in Ottawa. This was like my first few weeks or months sober. And I was reading this article, and it was about a marathon runner. And at this time, I was still new to sobriety. I was smoking. I was still very unhealthy. And I remember just reading this about this girl, how determined, dedicated she was, how she gets up, how she eats healthy. And I just was sitting there blown away. I was feeling at my worst. And I was like, that is the exact opposite of me right now. She is the exact opposite of my addict. And the seed was planted, and I started thinking to myself, like, I wonder if addiction never got its claws into me. Like, is that something I could have became? Like, she's so determined, so focused. She has so much control. I could barely resist having a drink for 4 hours, and here this girl's running for 4 hours. Like, it was just a complete opposite of who I was. And I was like, that's the opposite of my addict. And then I decided that I wanted to do that. I wanted to become the opposite of my addict. And this is where the identity shift came in. So for me, I used running. This is, based on a runner kind of skeleton book, as my transformation, but it can be anything. But what happened is I decided I wanted to be a runner, and that's who I decided I wanted my identity to be in sobriety. And so I started running, and I'd like run a minute, maybe two. It was a long process, but and I was smoking at this time, and eventually I had to stop smoking because it was interfering with my running goals. So I accidentally quit smoking because it was interfering with my running goals. But so I set this goal for myself, like by the end of the year, I'm going to run 500 kilometers over a 3-month period. And I did it determined. I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. I was only able to run like 3 kilometers at a time. Sometimes I did 2 a days, but I was so determined to get that goal. And what happened through that journey for me is I actually started to identify as a runner, and I started to eat healthy, and I started to needing to go to bed. And I was still having cravings for alcohol. I was still struggling. But what it was doing is while I was building this identity over here, this new health conscious person, it was like combating all of these cravings and all of these urges I had. Like I would have an urge to drink at 9 p.m. And then this new identity of mine would pop up and say, runners don't get drunk on a Tuesday. Like you have shit to do tomorrow. That's not something you can do. And I was changing my beliefs about myself by doing that. So this is where I talk about physical transformation. And like I accidentally fell onto this concept, and it transformed my entire sobriety because I evolved as a person and changed how I saw myself and how I believed about myself, that I was no longer using willpower to keep away from alcohol. It didn't have any power at all because I was just a different person,
So by finding that not a replacement, but something that really empowered you, it's like that the devil and the angel on your shoulder, saying, listen, we're going to do this. So this thing has to sit over here because we don't have time. It's not going to help you, be empowered to what you want to do now. That's really a great picture you painted.
Yeah. And identity work, which is the stuff I do now, you don't have to choose between alcohol and something else. Your identity chooses. So I would never want to drink, in the middle of the day anymore. I had stuff I needed to do to support my new identity. And the new person I became wasn't going to get drunk in the middle of the day. They weren't going to get drunk at all because they had to go for their run tomorrow and eat healthy and drink lots of water and stay hydrated. And so that was kind of born. And then I decided to run my first marathon. And, I just became this new health conscious person that alcohol didn't even affect me. It couldn't touch me because I was indifferent to it. It just wasn't a part of who I was anymore. So that's kind of the core of what I do now. And that's how I truly broke free. I didn't really become an alcohol, like I don't identify as an alcoholic like you do in AA or, different people do. If that word works for you, I encourage people to use it. But for me, I'm just a non-drinker. I got alcohol spilled on me the other day. And that happened to me in AA when I was in that program. I called my sponsor right away. I was panicked. I was sweating. I was in pain. I was almost like stressful because I was like, oh my God, it's coming back. Whereas when it happened to me the other day, it didn't affect me because I'm like, the person I am now doesn't touch alcohol. It has no effect on me. I'm indifferent.
Right.
So
you brought up a question for you is, what is the difference between like an alcoholic and a non-drinker? Like what would you describe that difference?
Yeah. So again, for me, it's a lot about beliefs and identity. And I struggled with the term alcoholic in the AA community because I felt like every time I said I was an alcoholic, I was saying I'm powerless over something and it can take over me anytime. If that word brings out positive, powerful meaning for you, that's a word that's, to be used. For me, it was verbiage, didn't work for me. And that's where I go to non-drinker. And that's the difference, like I shared, between hating and being indifferent. A non-drinker is indifferent to alcohol. An alcoholic hates it. When I'm indifferent, it doesn't affect me at all.
I love that you describe it that way because that's so true. As you say that now, I was like, oh, it clicks because you identify. So if you're an alcoholic, you identify that I'm an alcoholic and this drinking, but if you say I'm a non-drinker, I just don't drink. I love that. I'm going to share that with, I think that's really powerful to share. So now before we go into how you were doing, I do have a question for you. So I have 2 questions. One, what, I want to go back to your sister, like the relationship with your sister now. How is that? And then how did you like? Do you feel like if it, like you said, if she hadn't called you for 2 weeks, we may not have the Tia we have sitting here in front of us, right? So you kind of make that first step. And then the other one is, so thinking about that article you read with the person with the runner, have you ever sought that person out to be like, hey, your article really impacted my life?
Actually, I did reach out to her, but I didn't hear back. But I haven't done it in a while, so that's a good thing to bring up. No, I haven't heard back from her. I don't even remember her name, but I actually have the magazine sitting. I can see it from here. But yeah, that was a life-changing moment for me. That was a whole concept of recovery that was birthed and seeded in my brain. Um, if you think of a scale too, and I like to explain this to my clients, if you live in the middle and you never have any pain or any happiness, if pain is, if pain is over here and happiness is over here, I feel like everything on the scale mirrors each other. So if you're in the middle and you never have any pain or never have any challenges in life, you almost don't appreciate anything in the good. So for me, the scale represents like, yeah, opposite of my addict. If this is my absolute alcoholic version, struggling in addiction, and over here, I can become the opposite. This is my happiest place. And I can only experience that because of what I've experienced over here.
Yeah, that's so, and that's like, it's a great analogy too, because it also reminds me of, when you think about like when I work with women and they're talking about, well, I'm failing, well, there's a lesson to be failing. Why are you continuing to fail? Like, what is the action that's happening? What is the words you're saying to yourself to continue to fail? Right. And then being afraid to fail too is another challenge. Like, we can't be afraid to fail because it's not the end of the world. And you shared that in the story today. It's not the end of the world. If you relapse, it doesn't mean it's over. It's just, you've had a relapse. Let's pick yourself up, go use the tools that you have, and reach out to the people, your mentors, your sponsors, and those things to move forward. And there's a lot of lessons that come in failing, and there's a lot of lessons in being fearless of, don't be fearful of the fail, because the up and coming is so powerful, which is what you just shared, that the alcoholic versus the the empowerment of you being that runner, that marathon person that you're doing today. So I think that's a great picture for everybody to see. So those that are listening, if you watch it on YouTube at Conversations with Pearl, you'll be able to see really the analogy. I think it's really powerful to see it too. So what about your sister? Where's that relationship today?
Yeah, it's great. I mean, she's a teenage girl. She's 17 now. So it's as good as it can be with a teenage girl. She's very sassy, but like, she's seen videos I've shared. I'm very open about my sobriety. I'm very open about my struggle. And, she's used that to help some of her friends who are also struggling. And we have a different relationship because she knows, like, I'm open about my suffering and what I went through, and she knows she could come to me and talk to me with any of that. But I've also made her very well aware that, like, what she did changed my life, and you can't really, like, even at such a young age, I don't know, just like, it's not like something you go out and plan to do. But like my parents, for instance, they were like, we can't touch this. She has to figure it out at this point. As a parent, you can only do so much until it's not supporting your self-care, right? But a child's innocence, where she was just kind of like, I'm here, like, I'm hanging on. Sometimes addicts need that. And again, there's no blueprint for that. But sometimes we need more comfort and knowing that people are there rather than them telling us what to do. You know what I mean? That's what we hang on to a lot of the time. So that was life changing for me. But yeah, we have a great relationship, but she's, like I said, a teenage girl, so full of sass. But
do you worry about her? Like, I mean, I know, she's 17, she's coming to that age, and she's in that age probably where being exposed to any of that. I'm sure with the relationship you have and the openness you have, do you have any concerns with her? And I'm sure you've told her, with the relationship, it sounds like she knows to come to you.
Yeah, I don't think her personality is like mine. I don't think she's susceptible to addiction. I know it's not necessarily good to say that. So let me rephrase it. I always had addictive behavior. And a lot of it was out of fear and feeling like a burden and whatnot. But anytime I felt good, I always needed to feel better. Anytime I did something, it was always like, I need to do it 100 or not at all. My sister's more balanced, or it's not really necessarily a concern. And because this affected her, I think that's on a level for her as well. I mean, I remember I was home for one weekend and she had friends over and they were drinking, and she got really mad at her friend for getting drunk because I was home. And I'm like, Amy, I'm fine now. Like, it's okay. But it was just, she was so protective that like of my sobriety because she experienced it, unfortunately.
Right,
She
right.
experienced the dark side of
That's powerful. That's sweet.
it.
So we've talked about the difference between men and women when it comes to alcohol. So tell us why you specialize in the women's recovery and not everybody's recovery.
Yeah, so men and women are very different in how we become dependent on alcohol. I mean, women become dependent on alcohol faster and with a lower amount. We also have less enzymes in our body to break down alcohol. So if you talk to a lot of professionals in this world, they'll tell you like women often deteriorate, their bodies deteriorate, their minds deteriorate at faster rates than men. If you put a woman and a man drinking the same amount next to each other, women will be in a like worse off place physically, mentally, emotionally, way faster. And that's just biologically. Environmentally, we also drink different than men. A lot of the time, we're relational users. So if our partner drinks a lot, we drink a lot. And that comes back to, Pearl, you talk about women, we always feel like we need to please other people and be there. A lot of the time, women start using drugs or drinking only because their partners do. Men don't operate the same way. Um, and trauma plays a big role for women's recovery. I mean, 40% of women who are dependent on alcohol, and that's a very conservative study. Others are as high as 90, but I'm going to use a conservative one. 40% have experienced some sort of trauma in their life, sexual trauma or mental trauma, physical trauma. So all of those things in mind, a few of the biggest things in women's recovery that we need to focus on are things like women's self-esteem and building that up and making women feel empowered, which is what I talked to you about. And that's why I'm so big on it in recovery, because traditional recovery programs are designed by men for men. And that's the same with like the mainstream AA one. A lot of benefits from it. I talk about it in a very positive manner, but it was designed by men in like the 50s for men. And women, we need different elements in our recovery because we have different trauma. We have different response rates to it. And so we naturally also need to recover differently. So if you're not building your self-esteem in recovery, it's a recipe for disaster, and constantly breaking down a woman and telling her you're powerless, you're not going to ever conquer this if you don't do it with this program. It's scary to do that to a woman that walks into a room with trauma. You know what I mean? So I'm focused on the empowerment piece of that, which is not looked at, I don't think, enough, or at least I haven't found it enough. And that's one of the biggest differences, I think, in recovery that we need to start focusing on. Body image is another one for women. A lot of my recovery programs focus on body image, because it's overlooked in general. So, yeah.
So where do you see what you're doing today? Where are you taking your business and to reach more women? How are you doing that?
Yeah, so another big thing with women is we love communities. So one of my platforms is I have a Facebook group for women. It's about 500, 450 people right now. So there you can get free support there. I share a lot of content on, how to do boundary plans, how to support your recovery, what happens when you relapse, different kinds of things there. I have a YouTube channel on Pearl. You'll put in the link, I'm sure. I just started that, so I'm excited about that, but growing in that area. But overall, like my biggest passion is working with women one-on-one coaching. And I work with a certain amount of clients at a time when space opens up. But that's where, I work, some people are new in recovery. Some have been it for a certain time and are still afraid of relapsing all of the time. And I like to say it's not the quantity of sobriety you have, it's the quality. I had years of sobriety and I still relapse. So it's not about how long you're sober. That's great. I'm not taking away from that. But there needs to be a solid foundation in your recovery program to get you to break free. And within that, I really focus on those identity shifts. It's not necessarily becoming a runner, but who is the opposite of your addict? What does that look like for you? And though, like, is it about being the best mom you can be? I have one client that was the opposite for her. I want to be the woman that is able to pick up their kids at 3 p.m. for their soccer game. And she's like, I can't right now because I get drunk at 1 p.m. And so she always has to go by someone else. And that by no means is a small like opposite. Being the best mom you can be is probably the best opposite version you can be. But that was her opposite. And we worked on that identity. And what does that opposite look like? Well, she's there, she's picking up her kids, she's smiling, she's not great, so different things like that. And that's what I'm most passionate about. That's where I fall in love, is seeing the transformations of physical, mental, emotional, those identity shifts in the people I work with.
I think that's so cool, is to help them, like help walk them through and see what that identity is. Because sometimes women, we don't see it. We, even in an ad on top of it that you're an addict, sometimes we just can't see the forest through the trees, right? There's so much on our plate, and we want to do good, and we want to, we have a dream. Maybe you want to be an entrepreneur, but whatever that might be, or you want to be that all-star employee at the corporation you work for, but you can't make that happen because you can't see the forest through the tree, and you don't have somebody guiding you and coaching you. And I think it's important too for women to understand that getting a coach is a huge investment in ourselves, because we do think as women that we can just do it all, and we should be doing it all. I mean, we grew up in the age where our moms did everything. They ran the house, and so my granny, she ran the house, and then my mom, she ran the house when she worked, right? So then we grew up in this, as a little girl, we watched our moms do it, right? So changing that is so important, and understanding, especially in today's world. I mean, my gosh, our moms, God bless them. I don't know that I could have been the last year, had kids at home, try to balance work and be a teacher. I mean, that's like, you add that onto it on top of that. And, I've watched my husband, coach his employees that he works with through that, finding that balance. You guys, okay, if one has to get up early, you can change your schedule, and like figure out what that balance is. And without having a coach or a mentor to help you figure that out, it can be overwhelming. And if you add the fact that then now you have an addiction that, and that's you're identifying with it, I can just imagine how hard that is. So I think what you're doing is just amazing work. And I think
for me too, like just on that point, I got a sober coach and a recovery coach, and I struggled with doing that at the beginning because I could get a sponsor, and I was like, well, maybe I'm just not finding the right sponsor. But what changed for me when I got one is sponsorship in the AA program is about a spiritual shift, and they take you through 12 steps. What my sober coach took me through was an entire look at every area of my life. Which I wasn't looking at. I wasn't looking at my physical health. I wasn't looking at my sleep hygiene, water. I wasn't looking at exercise. I wasn't looking at boundary planning with people. So by far, I was scared to do it too, but it was the best return on my investment, because in theory, like alcohol addiction, it cost me so much. It cost me hundreds of thousands of dollars,
Yeah.
And a relapse would have costed me everything. It's crazy that I'm willing to go spend money on all kinds of things, but that was my hardest thing.
Yeah.
But anyways, it was the best return on my investment. I would have lost everything. I wouldn't have the life I have now if I didn't take that leap as well.
And you were talking earlier too about your parents, and as a parent of a child who's walking a path similar to yours, that's his story to share. But as a parent, to sit back and watch that story play out, and to know, like you were talking about your parents finally having to make that decision that you've got to kind of like, they've got to pull back so you can find yourself, right? It's so hard because you want so much for your kids. You plan out their success. You plan out they're going to do whatever it is, whether they're going to be, an astronaut or fireman, whatever that is, right? You've got this in your vision in their head from when they're little. And so when you watch them, you just want it so badly for them. And so as a mom, I can totally get where, your mom and your dad were coming from on that. And so how is that? How was their support once you started on your journey? How did that support come into play, and how is that today?
Yeah, it was great. And they've always been supportive. Like if I look back, I wouldn't have handled me any differently. I always felt like I could go home. I just didn't want to. But I always knew they were there. And like, since getting sober, my relationship with my stepdad has gotten a lot better. I actually had a lot of resentment towards him for things I believed and ways I looked at things. Like just that one example, like I didn't feel like he let me call him dad, things like that. And so we've been able to talk and really understand, a lot about each other openly. Yeah, but No, it's been awesome. And like, I'm of course closer. I've always been close with my mom, but we're closer now. And it's just different. I think you can tell when, like, you can tell when your kid's not doing well, you know. I don't talk as much. I don't go home. I don't reach out. So it took them a little bit of time to see the consistency. And, you know, that's also important to keep in mind. Like, just because I get sober doesn't mean everybody around me is all of a sudden on board. I have to be consistent before I can earn that trust back. And a lot of the time, especially, I felt that way too when I'm working with people now. It's kind of like you made this change and you expect everybody to be on board, and you know, you want them to be in this boat with you. And a lot of the time they support you, but it's okay to have a healthy distance and to protect yourself in that process. There's a million ways to look at addiction, whether I'm working with a parent, you know, I'm talking to parents about what their lens is. Everybody needs to also protect their self first. You know, it's us against addiction. It's not us against each other.
Yeah, that's really powerful. That's really, I love that. That's great advice too, is, you know, to, you know, as a parent, I've always been there, but I know, I mean, you and I were talking about that before we hopped on. I know when something's not right with my kids because how they behave, how they talk, how they, you know, their actions and all that. So that's really important. So tell us today. So what's going on with your running? Like, are you still that marathon focus?
Yeah, I've transitioned to triathlon, so I'm training for an Ironman, depending on if it opens up. So Ironman is swimming, biking, and then a marathon. So that's going to be my hardest challenge. My life is amazing. I'm in a beautiful relationship where I'm able to communicate and share my needs and be vulnerable and be uncomfortable. But you know, I wouldn't have been able to keep a relationship in a healthy way if I was drinking. We have a cute little miniature Australian puppy. Um, and life is great. And I shared this in my actually Facebook group. Like, I talk about how amazing my life is now that I'm sober. But that's not to be confused with I'm still living life. You know, life is not always easy. And I don't want to confuse people. Just because you get sober, it doesn't mean it's all uphill mountains and roses and whatnot. But why it's beautiful is because I get to live, I get to experience the good and the bad. I'm not numbing out, I'm not escaping. But I still have challenges, you know, I still have my relationship still has problems. I still get in fights with my family, you know, I'm still living life, but I'm just doing it way better than I would be if I was drinking.
Yeah, that's really a great point too. Life is going to continue on. You're going to have challenges. So now it doesn't mean that life's not beautiful and life's not perfect. We all know that, but now you can look at it as a totally different, you can be engaged in it now instead, like you said, trying to numb it away. So, well, this has been great. And for those that are listening, Tia and I, we also partner up together on things together. And we have you guys got to hear, she co-hosts with us last week. Sharon RG, who does mending meditation. And so if you go and follow us on the YouTube and link up and connect with us, you'll be able to get in touch with Tia and myself. But we also offer a masterclass program where you can work with Tia, myself, and Sharon, who does meditation, to take you through self-care. Tia actually she takes that and coaches a little bit about moving and running and just getting your body going. And I like how you described, Tia, like saying, you know, how you share the story sometimes you've shared before about how you could barely make your bed. So now you're running out the door. So I always like to tell my Tia's going to get you from barely making your bed to getting you out the door walking. So so if you want more about that information, you can go visit us at wsliving.com to get that. But Tia, share with us, we're going to put links in there. What's the best way for somebody listening right now, they want to write down something to get in touch with you?
Yeah, so we'll put links. You can, I'll give you my email address. You can follow my YouTube channel, or if you're a sober woman, you can join my Facebook group. I think that's the best platform right now to get a lot of content. And if you know you're looking for coaching right now, if you want to break free from addiction, if you're worried about a relapse, we can just get on a free call. I can book a free breakthrough call with you. There's 15 minutes, and I'll share tips on recovery, tips on next steps, and see if you want to continue working or not. There's no obligation there, but to connect with another sober woman, and I can help guide you down different avenues.
And so that's at rediscoverycoaching.com, right?
That's my website. And then we'll post the link for booking a call if you'd like. And
Awesome. Awesome. Well, okay. So this has been a lot of fun. Everybody listening, been so honored to have Tia here, and it's been really powerful information. And as a mom, Tia and I've talked offline about a few different things, and she's been a great guidance and coach, a mini coach for myself, and like I always tell everybody, like Tia said, she got a recovery coach. Coaches need coaches. So just know that we live life too. And, we have struggles, and sometimes we need a coach as well. So I'm excited that Tia has been part of my world since I think last October, around like October, November timeframe, through social media. It's been a great thing that and collaborating with you has been awesome. So I'm excited for things to come as well. And so as we close out the show, everybody who watches the show, that we do this question and we pull a card, and our cards are from Better Question, Better Life. I'm going to hold them up. Better Question, Better Life. And I don't get any payback on this, but these are amazing cards. They're Better Question, betterlife.com. And what I love about the cards is that every day I'll pull a card out and I will either journal on it, meditate, or pray over it. So what we're going to do, Tia, is we're going to shuffle the cards. You're going to tell me when to stop, and then you're going to answer the card that gets pulled. So here we go. Tell me when to stop.
Stop.
Okay. So your question is, oh, this is a good one. It's so funny how these cards always line up with what we're discussing. So what do I see differently? So what do you see differently in your life today?
Oh, everything in my life is different today. If I compare myself to 5 years ago, biggest thing is I invested in myself. I bet on myself. I was able to break free from addiction from doing that. I have healthy relationships where I communicate. I've met amazing people like Pearl. And thank you for that introduction and for having me. It's been a blessing to get to know you, and you have coached me through a lot of stuff too. So if you are thinking about working with Pearl, highly recommend doing it 100%. But yes, back to me. In my life, everything is different and in the best possible way.
Awesome. I'm so glad you were on today. So as we close out the show, as you all know, I truly believe that we come into this world as an amazing oyster. And we know that oyster's a little rough on the outside. We kind of have to start opening it, working on what's happening on the inside, and let that kind of grow and create this beautiful pearl. And once you open it, we all have that beautiful pearl on the inside. So I want you to go, and I want you to open your pearl, that oyster, and find your inner pearly greatness. So thanks for joining us on Conversations with Pearl, and have an amazing rest of your day. Thanks, Tia.
Thanks for having me.